Hey, what's going on? Welcome to another episode of AngularAir. I am your host, Justin, and on today's episode, we are going to hear more about module federation and Angular 11. Excited to see that. We had a show previously with our guest about this topic, and so we're going to get more information on the latest today. So that's going to be really exciting. Can't wait to hear about it. Let's say hi to our panelists, and then we'll say hi to our guest, and we'll get into the content. Joining us today, we've got Mike with us. Keyboard Mike, what's up, Mike?
Not too much. I'm multitasking today. I'm getting a few things done at the same time. Everything's going well. Happy that it's Friday, ready to end the work week and start the weekend, but excited for what I've got going on today with this show.
Nice. Alyssa, how's it going, Alyssa?
Very well. I have some espresso here. It's iced. And yeah, I'm ready to go. Let's do it.
All right. So as you drink that throughout the show, we expect your levels to go higher and higher. Is that what we should be ready? Okay. No. Well, or is it already there?
It works opposite with ADHD. That's why you take stimulants to calm down. So you should see a calmer Alyssa by the end of the show.
Oh, I gotcha. Okay. All right. Well, we're happy to have you here. So, and our guest today is Manfred. Manfred, how's it going?
Yeah, fine. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, great to have you back as always. We're very excited to have you here. What's the latest? What you've been up to lately?
Well, I'm really doing a lot of stuff with this new module federation thing we've talked last time. A lot of my customers are interested into it because somehow they want or they need to implement micro frontends. And module federation will be a very straightforward solution for this. Currently, it's ready, but it's not ready within the Angular CLI because it needs Webpack 5. And Webpack 5 is currently experimental within the Webpack CLI. So they are prototyping a lot. I'm helping them. And with May, hopefully, we will get CLI 12. Which means we will get a stable integration into Webpack 5, and then we can go into production with it, hopefully. So that's the plan.
Very cool.
Hold on. You used a lot of big words there.
Yeah.
That I think we should dive into and kind of provide a little bit of a glossary for, we'll say me, and maybe if anybody else gets benefit from it, that'd be great too. So the two things I want you to go back over and give a little bit more explanation are micro front ends. What are those? Why are those important? And also this main topic of module federation.
Yeah, with pleasure. So the idea of micro front ends is not that new. It has been around for several years. The idea is to subdivide a big software project into tiny applications, like we do in the backend with microservices. And the main idea of this is to scale across teams. Because if you have a lot of people, all those people need to communicate with each other. And somehow you want to prevent the need for a lot of communications and a lot of meetings and a lot of guidelines so that everything works together. And that's why all of them get an own project. A tiny project, which is part of an overall software system. Think about Office 365. You have those, not tiny, but you have those isolated Office applications, Word, Excel, and so on. And they don't need to know much about each other. They are separate applications that can be developed, deployed in isolation or separately. That's the idea of micro frontends.
And where does module federation come in to our mind?
Yeah, the thing is, when you have just separated applications, then it is fine to just do tiny single-page applications. You can interconnect them with hyperlinks. But if we want to display everything as an integrated solution, you need somehow to find a way to load everything into your main solution. That means at the end of the day, you have a bunch of separately compiled applications, and you want to load all of them into your big, let's call it shell application. And in the past, that was not that easy, because in the past you had to deal with a lot of tracks. For instance, iframes. I mean, obviously, iframes are not the most popular HTML tag, if you ask me. But because of this need, a lot of people used iframes in internal solutions. Or you could lazy load custom elements, web components, which also comes with some trade-offs. But now, with module federation, loading something that has been separately compiled is really straightforward. So it looks like lazy loading, but at the end of the day, you are loading something from over there, from another location.
Can you talk a little bit about the decision of wanting, because what we're talking about with micro front ends is combining multiple applications, which may and or may not, and you can talk about that as well, include multiple JavaScript frameworks. Can you talk a little bit about the decision of whether or not that is or is likely a product of having multiple frameworks, and what the decision process would look like to decide that you want to go down that route?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. A lot of companies want to have this. They want to have either, let's say, different frameworks, or at least different versions of the same framework. And this is where all of this gets somehow a bit odd. It's doable. If you wrap your micro frontends into custom elements, into web components, it's doable, but you need a lot of tricks. For instance, you have several instances of your router. You have an Angular router, another Angular router, a React router, a Vue router, and all of them need to work together. You can do this. Yeah, it's doable, but you need some tricks. Also, routing to a web component is not that easy. With the Angular router, you need a wrapper component. So it's doable. I'm calling it the Frankenstein architecture. I guess you know this guy, the Frankenstein monster. And yeah, this is what you will end up with. At the end of the day, also bundle size will increase dramatically. I have some customers that needs this, and I have some customers that say, well, we could do this, but we limit ourselves to one framework in the current version so that we can work seamlessly, or we can integrate everything seamlessly into the shell.
Mm.
You mentioned that the value, one of the values is that teams can work on these individual pieces separately, right, and focus on their thing. I think another big value of it, and you kind of alluded to this when you talked about this concept of a shell that then loads these different pieces, is, when we talk about like an Angular world, that's an entire app, right? And if you don't do the module federation approach, or the separation here with the micro frontend kind of thing, then you have an update to one of those pieces. You have to deploy the entire app, right, in order to do that when you're not doing the module federation, right? So if you just do a typical way, and one of the challenges there is that you update a small segment of it, but your process for deployment for your company is certification and all kinds of steps that need to go through to deploy that. Now, you have to do that every time for every segment, because the entire app goes as a whole. Whereas I think the peak of the excitement of this is that segment that you need to release and make changes to, only that could go, right? And now you don't have to worry about the entire app reshipping the build of it and things like that.
Yeah, totally. That's a big point. It brings back agility. Even though you have several teams to coordinate, all of them can work in an agile way. Perhaps the teams contain or consist of just, let's say, 7 ± 2 people. They can really work in an agile way, independently, and, as they say, deliver business value on a regular basis without syncing up with the others and without all those heavyweight processes. Yeah, that's a good point. On the other side, if you only have one team, then very likely all of this is an overkill. Perhaps there are some benefits, but it's very likely when you only have, let's say, 3 or 4 people, a tinier team, it's an overkill, because now all your dependencies become runtime dependencies. That means you cannot tell at compile time if this works together, if there is a breaking change. You will only find out at runtime, and perhaps it works, perhaps your application crashes. You cannot tell upfront.
Very, very cool. Very cool.
So,
One of the things I kind of think about it, do an analogy to in my mind is like an operating system, right? And you have an operating system that's like your main application, essentially, and then you want to run different programs, and you want to, install different programs or update programs at different times. But the operating system is like the main shell that's managing, what the user is seeing and running it at any given time, or that sort of thing.
Yeah. I like this metaphor. I haven't heard it before, but I really like this metaphor.
Is this the only use case for the module federation?
Well, I think there are some other use cases. The main use case is for sure scaling over teams, but let's say you need to incorporate something another team has built. Sometimes one company buys another company, they need to merge, and so they have different software products that need to merge. Or I have one customer who is doing a very specialized product, and they're really focusing on their domain, but for some use cases, they also need other functionality. And so they just buy it from another vendor and integrate it into their product. Perhaps also migrating to another framework is a valid concept. I mean, at the end of the day, with ng upgrade, we are doing similar stuff. Perhaps with ng upgrade, everything is a bit more intermingled, or everything can be a bit more intermingled, Angular components with AngularJS components with Angular components and AngularJS services and so on. You try to prevent this high degree of coupling within a micro front-end solution, but on a technical level, it is quite similar.
But that also comes with trade-offs of having all of these different environments. One of the things that we've focused as web developers on recently is minimizing bundle sizes. And I know Model Federation takes some steps towards that. However, if you're talking about a multiple framework or a multiple versions of a single framework, then the browser is responsible for downloading those different frameworks and also parsing those and loading those into the browser. So it's kind of counterproductive. I should clarify that I've kind of been on the fence. Well, not on the fence. I've kind of been against the idea of what's the name of the thing we're talking about? Micro frontends. Thank you. Because of the idea that what we're doing by making those decisions is somewhat putting more emphasis on developer ergonomics instead of on the user experience.
Yeah, totally. So you already state the right word. It's about trade-offs. I mean, the whole life is about trade-offs. You cannot have the cake and eat it. I heard sometimes. The thing is, here we have really a trade-off between bundle size and, let's say, fully isolated micro frontends. You cannot have both. And at the end of the day, first of all, to come to a decision, you need to have a look at your architectural goals. And some of my customers are saying bundle size is very important. It's the highest goal. And others say, well, bundle size is not that important. We have other things that are more important, like working independently or like providing business value. But of course, if it is a customer-facing application, if you want to sell something, then of course, bundle size is the highest goal or one of the highest goals. If you work within the intranet, where you have a lot of bandwidth, then it might not be that crucial. It always depends. So first of all, you need to have a look at your architectural goals, and then you can evaluate possible solutions against them. The good thing is to come back to module federation. With module federation, you have the choice. You can say, let's stick with one Angular major version, and then module federation can share one instance of one Angular major version between all the micro frontends. It's then only loaded once, even though they are compiled separately.
So
Yeah,
it really is always a trade-off, though. If you're using micro front ends, your users will notice. It's going to be painful. Or is there really not a way to do it where you can have both? Is that what I was hearing?
I'm not sure if they will notice in each and every case, because when I'm sharing Angular or other frameworks, NGRX or my design system, then it will not affect bundle size that much. Of course, every time I'm sharing something, I cannot do tree shaking, because if I tree shake something, I need to know what the other parties need of this library. But when it comes to separate the compiled stuff, I don't know it upfront what they need at runtime, so better not tree shake it. Module federation is disabling tree shaking for this reason for shared libraries. But I think they will not notice that much, the users, when I share libraries, especially not when I go with module federation, because the good message is, from Angular's point of perspective, using module federation looks like using lazy loading. Angular itself does not recognize that Webpack 5 underneath the covers is grabbing something from over there, from another origin or another location. If I go with iframes, of course, they will very likely notice. I have prepared some slides, if I might show them, and a bit of live coding to give you a feeling how this works together with Angular currently.
Awesome. Let's do it. Looking forward to it. Yeah. Let's do it.
Cool. Great. So here I have a slide. You should see it now. And one metaphor I really like to use when it comes to, I call it federated Angular, because we are federating several Angular solutions, is this picture here. Have you ever seen this picture, this drawing? It's from, yeah, it's the helicopter from Leonardo da Vinci, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And he designed a helicopter, and now hold your breath, in 1400 something, which is really cool, in 1400 something. So he designed it, but he didn't have the material to build it, because the material was not available back then. Meanwhile, we have the material, so scientists found out it would really fly. And in the case of micro frontends, it's the same. The idea has been around for quite a while, but we have not been capable of building it in a very straightforward way, because we didn't have the material, the frameworks. As mentioned before, this all is about loading separately compiled stuff into your shell. If you look closely here we have localhost 3000, here we have localhost 5000, and this micro frontend is loaded into here. So now with module federation, this works. By the way, here I have another prototype. This is not about micro frontends, but this is also a valid use case for module federation. Some people don't need to go with micro frontends, but with a plugin system. For instance, I've discussed with this company on a conference. They have built a workflow designer, and the workflow tasks like this here, download, upload, analyze, enrich, can be provided by several parties. And of course, that's why they are developed independently. That's why they are deployed independently. And at runtime, the workflow designer here just gets some metadata about this and that task, and then it should be capable of using it and loading it on demand. So this was a real world use case, And I just created a simple, tiny demonstration out of this to show how this would work also with module federation, which is quite a game changer, if you ask me. By the way, all those examples can be found on my blog. And this is what this tiny presentation I have prepared for you today is about. It's about three things. First of all, it's about module federation. I know we've talked about this topic, I think it was several months ago when I was here the last time. But to get everyone into the boat, I decided to add those 4 slides again to the slide deck. The second part is new. We haven't talked about this here before. It's about what I'm calling federated Angular. And it shows how we can compile this goodness of module federation with the Angular CLI. I've prepared a lot of live coding. I hope I will not regret it. So let's cross fingers. And I have also prepared a possible roadmap. The big question is, when can we use it safely?
So tomorrow, just like I tomorrow, right? I mean, we heard it here. Manfred promised tomorrow. All right, cool.
I will not sign anything like this. But yeah, you can start prototyping tomorrow. Yeah. Yeah, so about me, I'm Manfred. I'm doing a lot of trainings and workshops, and I'm a bit connected to the Angular community. I live in Austria. I do a lot of stuff in Germany and sometimes in other countries, if I promise that I will behave correctly. So module federation, those are the 4 slides I've shown you before. The idea is to load separately compiled code. At the end of the day, the idea is to do something like this. This was not possible before because Webpack does not allow scenarios like this. Webpack, and so the CLI, using Webpack underneath, assumes that everything is there at compile time because everything is built together and everything is optimized together. Think on tree shaking, for instance. But now with module federation, this works. You get 2 roles, the host and the remote. I am calling it the shell and the micro frontend. And within the shell, you can map URLs. You can say, hey, this URL points over to this micro frontend, separately compiled and built and deployed stuff. And by the way, over there, it's also called MFE1. And then over there, you can expose files. That means you have, for instance, this component as part of your remote, of your application, and you say, hey, I'm sharing it with others. I'm sharing it under this name. And the coolest thing of this is now your shell only needs to leverage a dynamic import to get the stuff from over there. And that's why Angular itself does not recognize about this. For Angular, this looks like lazy loading, but at the end of the day, Webpack is doing all the heavy lifting underneath. And that's really cool because that means you don't need a meter framework anymore. There are some quite complicated meter frameworks out there trying to orchestrate different applications within your shell. Here, just go with the default functionality and you are fine.
Quick question. To be clear of what we're looking at, I see it in the comment that we're looking at a Webpack config file here, correct?
Yeah.
So we don't have to do anything inside of our applications. This is about the build configuration.
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
It's a Webpack config file, or to say the least, a partial Webpack config file, because the CLI is generating most of it. But somehow we need to provide those several sections with this metadata about module federation. Cool, great. So talking about metadata, of course, the shell also needs some metadata of the remote. This metadata is generated by Webpack module federation, and normally it's called the remote entry or remote entry point. Just a tiny JavaScript file. You load it into the shell. Here I'm doing it in a rather static way, , but this also works completely dynamically. And then when the shell knows about the micro frontends, about this and that and this one over there, it can load it on demand. And we've already talked about this. We can even share libraries. I can say, hey, let's share Angular core. Let's load it 10 times because we have 10 micro frontends. Just load it once and share it. I'm a lonely child, but nevertheless, I like to share things. And here in this case, it's really beneficial. Okay, this is the summary of what I've showed you last time. Now, the big question is how we can integrate this into Angular and the CLI, because I assume most of us don't want to use Webpack directly anymore. We did this back then, and it was fun, but now we have the CLI, so let's leverage the CLI. Well, the good message here is that the CLI is using Webpack underneath the covers. That's the good message. However, the CLI is shielding Webpack from us. And normally that's good, because we don't want to get in touch with Webpack. We just want to use the CLI, and the CLI shall delegate to it. That means somehow we need to find a way to squeeze our module federation config into Webpack underneath. I think squeezing in something is not the official technical term, but you've got the point. And that means, yeah, we need to find a way. And fortunately, there is an official way. We can use a custom builder. Rocco, for instance, was part of the CLI team, so I assume he really knows these concepts quite well because they have been invented there. The idea is to have an exchangeable, I always say an exchangeable strategy. And this strategy is building your application. The default strategy for applications is delegating to Webpack. So everything we need to do here is to provide a custom builder that delegates our configuration to Webpack. And then it needs to delegate to the default builder, which is triggering Webpack underneath the covers. So at the end of the day, this is about 10 lines of code in the core and a lot of boilerplates to make this work together with the CLI as a custom builder. So we could do something like this by hand, but you don't need, because, and this is my current work on this, I've already done this. I've provided this package, Angular Architects Module Federation, and it already does this for you. Basically, it does three things. It generates the skeleton of the module federation config. You don't need it to learn it by heart. You just need to fill in placeholders. It installs a custom builder, which is enabling module federation underneath the covers. And then it assigns a new board for ng-serve so that you can ng-serve everything side by side for debugging purposes. This is what it is doing,
Since
basically.
you've already created this, is there anything missing for someone who wants to get started with like using module federation? Wouldn't they just be able to take this and get started with micro frontends? Or because I know you're mentioning that, you know, Webpack.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, you need somehow to tell the CLI to use Webpack 5. And then you need this tiny plugin, which is just punching a hole into this border between the CLI and Webpack so that Webpack underneath knows, hey, now we are doing module federation. Yeah, that should be it. The thing is, Webpack 5 is final, but the CLI 11 is currently using just an experimental opt-in for Webpack 5. By default, it comes with Webpack 4. And so this is fun for prototyping, but for production use cases, let's wait until tomorrow. No, let's wait until May when CLI 12 comes out. And CLI 12 will support Webpack 5. Then we have it. Then we can use this plugin, CLI 12, and we should be fine. Cool. The usage of it is using about ng-add or is using ng-add. Let's ng-add this package. Let's adjust the configuration, the generated Webpack configuration, and then let's call ng-serve, and yeah, hopefully it works. And for this, I have provided a little demonstration.
Yay!
This is where the live coding part comes in, so let's cross fingers. But we've talked about it before. I have 3 quality managers sitting in front of me, so I guess you will take care of me a bit. So let us have a look into this example. Under localhost 5000, I have my shell. This is my tiny shell. Under localhost 3000, I have my micro frontend. We can see the dashed red lines around it, the dashed red border. And when I'm clicking here at flights, then we see that we see nothing because this is not implemented yet. This is now my goal in this live coding session to load the micro frontend in this very route. And so I would say, let's have a look into the source code. If we look here into the source code, we see a monorepo. It consists of 2 projects, my micro frontend 1 project and my shell. Saying this, you don't need to go with a monorepo. You can also use separate repos. It's really up to you. Both comes with its very own advantages and disadvantages. Here, for the sake of simplicity, it is a monorepo.
But at this point, do we want to be concerned about the same version of Angular for both of those apps, right?
Well, if it is a monorepo, you don't need to be concerned because here automatically you have the same version of Angular.
But to do like the module federation stuff, ideally we would have those running the same version, right? Your MFE1 and your shell would be running the same version of Angular. You could do it with different versions, but you have to do a whole lot of other stuff, right, to pull that off. Is that correct?
Yeah. So at least the same major version. Because officially, you know, if you have the same major version, the newer version is backwards compatible to the older one. And module federation has a really nice mechanism. I'm calling it negotiation. It is negotiating about the version to use. So it says, hey, you, the shell, you are using, let's say, Angular 11, and you, the micro frontend, are using Angular 11.1. Let's go with your version of Angular because 11.1 should be compatible to 11. And within this negotiation, they are just deciding which version to use. You can configure it, but by default, the highest compatible version according to semantic versioning is used, which is quite a nice feature if you ask me.
Yeah, that's nice. Cool.
So perhaps a funny story. I know the creator of Webpack and of all of this, and he told me he implemented module federation twice because after he implemented it the first time, it was in beta, he recognized that he needed this mechanism for negotiating about the version to use. And so he came up with this second implementation to make this work.
Nice.
Cool. So if you look here into my package JSON, you see I'm using Angular 11 and also the CLI 11. Currently, there is an issue with 11.1. That's why I'm sticking with 11. And the thing is, as mentioned, 11 comes with Webpack 4. It has been heavily tested with Webpack 4. I mean, Webpack 5 became final just 1 month before CLI 11 was released. That's why they decided to stick with Webpack 4. But we can force it into Webpack 5 with this section here, which is respected by Jan.
We have a few people using the CLI that are watching. Again, mainly me that I'm worried about. You mentioned there's versions with 11.1 and potentially 11.2 with the CLI. Is that issue just related to module federation, or are there other issues that we should be concerned about?
It's related to this experimental use case where you force the CLI into using Webpack 5.
Okay.
If you go with the baked-in Webpack 4, everything is fine.
I figured that was the case, but just wanted to clarify.
Yeah. It's a good question to prevent confusion. So the CLI is, as always, stable, heavily tested, and when it comes to this experimental stuff, there is currently an issue in version 11.1. That's why I'm always saying this all is more about prototyping, to find out how it works, to get started quickly when everything works seamlessly. And this will be the case when CLI 12 shows up in, I guess, May, plus minus. Okay, so install it with yarn, not with npm, and then we'll get Webpack 5. And now the funny part comes. Here I have prepared two, let's call it tabs within my console or Windows terminal, one for the shell and one for the micro frontend. And now we can do something like ng-add Angular architects / module federation. And this is now downloading the package and adding it to the Angular JSON. You know, patience is a gift. Not mine, but it's a gift. And after this, pardon?
You mentioned yarn versus npm. Do we have to use yarn? Is that for a certain thing?
Yeah, because only yarn is currently supporting this section here. There is a special npm package that makes it work with the npm package manager, but out of the box, only yarn is supporting this here. Yeah, the plugin is one more time using something Broco implemented back then. One of the best things of the CLI, I really love it, namely a schematic. And it is asking me several things. Which application do you want to enable? Let's say I want to go with the shell. And which port do you want to use? Let's go with port 5000. And then a lot of stuff is generated. I just want to draw your attention to this here. This is your partial Webpack config. So not a fully flagged one, just a partial Webpack config with everything you need for module federation. The rest is still generated by the CLI. Let's do the rest or the same for MFE1. MFE1 is the project name. Here I go with localhost 3000.
So if the rest of the config is done by the CLI, do you have to marry the two, or are they plopping it in the same file, or?
Yeah, so this is done by this builder. Here in the Angular JSON, a custom builder is created or registered, and this custom builder just takes our Webpack config and it squeezes it into the Webpack config that is generated by the CLI.
So you don't have to manually go in and copy paste things and make that. Okay, I got you.
No, you don't need to do this. That's the good message about this. You don't need to do this by hand. Yeah. So at the end of the day, it's a Webpack merge operation, merging this into the Webpack config provided by the CLI. And then the default builder is doing what it is doing all the time, what it has done the last, I don't know, 3 years since Angular 6, since builders have been introduced. Namely, it delegates to Webpack, it uses this generated configuration, and Webpack is doing the rest. Cool, so let's have a look. Let's have a look into, perhaps I should close my Outlook.
Always.
You know, compromising emails, and so it's not a good idea when we are online. So let's have a look into this Webpack config.js file. It's part of the shell. And very important is the fact that The shell is just an ordinary Angular application. It just has this configuration file now. And there is some boilerplate, but the interesting thing is here, the module federation plugin, and now we need to adapt it a bit. For instance, here we have one section for remotes, for micro frontends. Let's get rid of it, because here we are talking about the shell. That means we need this section here, where I'm saying, hey, the path MFE1 points to my micro frontend 1. Over there, it's also called micro frontend 1. And the metadata file, the remote entry point, can be found here. This is what I'm calling static federation, because I'm hard coding the location of the metadata file in my Webpack config. And you know, the Webpack config is only respected at compile time. So this is rather a static way of doing things. It's fine for trying everything out, but it's not that great for production. For production, you need a more dynamic use case. This is the alternative dynamic federation. We will look into it a bit later. Alternative. And those are my shared libraries. I'm saying I'm sharing Angular Core Common and the router, and this is to fine-tune the behavior of Webpack module federation. This tells Webpack module federation what to do if there were two not compatible Angular versions, like Angular 11 and Angular 10. Two different majors, they are not compatible by definition. And yeah, Singleton is perhaps a good choice for Angular. Singleton is implementing the Highlander principle. I don't know if you know the Highlander principle. There can only be one.
Only be
so
one.
In this case, only one version of the library is loaded, the newest one.
I'm a little afraid for the ones that aren't the one. What happens to them? Because in Highlander, it gets pretty crazy.
Yeah. It's a tough guy, I guess. So honestly, I have never seen this TV show, but somehow I know this slogan, there can only be one. So yeah,
There you go.
That's what we have here.
It's an excellent reference.
Oh, cool. Glad you like it. And strict version, as the name implies, is applying strict rules. We get a runtime error because perhaps it does not work, and we blow up everything better at the beginning than during using the application.
I love that. That's beautiful. Yes, I agree. Explosions should happen first.
Yeah. Yeah, like in every good James Bond movie, you need a hook at the beginning. If you don't like this, if you say, hey, let's be chilled, let's ease a bit, let's try it out, perhaps it works, we will see, then remove this flag. Then you will get the highest version, and perhaps it works, perhaps it doesn't work. But the risk
like
is on
the Alyssa version of programming versus Justin and Mike. Like Justin and Mike would for sure have strict version on, and I'd be like, "Wow, we don't need all that business." So I got it. I'm with you.
Yeah, let's try it out. Let's calm down a bit, you know. Cool. So, and I think that shows that module federation is quite powerful when it comes to configuring such stuff. There are even other things, but let's go on with this live coding example. I'm really curious if it works at the end. So this is what we have in our shell. So just an ordinary Angular application, and it points to another application with this configuration file. Over there, we have the same. When we look into MFE1, we have the same, but we don't need this section. We need the first one. I'm saying, hey, I'm MFE1, and here is the file with all the metadata, and I want to expose a module which is located here, flights.module. And we have the same shared section.
Yeah, it's
By
weird
the way,
that we got the shared section in both places. Isn't that weird? Shouldn't it
yeah,
just be
you
the
need it in
host?
both places. Otherwise, it will not be shared. So if this micro frontend would say, hey, I want to have my own version of Angular, then you could skip it. And so it would get its own version compiled into its bundles.
Oh, okay.
I mean, when it comes to Angular, it's not the smartest idea because Angular is stateful. And we don't want to end up with two instances of Angular, where this instance knows 3 components and the other instance is knowing another 3 components. And perhaps they want to interact with each other, which does not work because they live on different planets. So sharing Angular as a stateful framework is vital, I guess. But when it comes to a framework that is not stateful, let's talk about RxJS, then it might be okay to have one version here and one version there. Obviously, it increases your bundle size, but if you're fine with it, it will work.
Oh, see, I guess I just thought when you're doing this, you're opting into sharing, and the host is going to specify like how we're going to share. But I guess you're saying that each individual part has to specify, yeah, I'm opting into sharing, right? Is what you're saying.
Yeah, totally.
Okay.
That's a good way to put it. You have to opt in to share it, yeah.
Yeah, very good way.
Cool. If you look into this flights module, this is just the ordinary Angular module. It has subroutes. And the thing is, if my shell loads this module via lazy loading, via module federation, it can immediately route to the subroutes or subroutes defined here within this configuration. Saying this, let's have a look to the shell. Here we have app routes file, and here I can introduce lazy loading. And you see, from Angular's perspective, this is just traditional lazy loading. Load children using dynamic imports pointing over there. And so Angular does not recognize that we are doing micro frontends, but Webpack underneath the covers hopefully will. And so it will load everything from over there at runtime. That's why I mentioned before, we don't need any meta framework orchestrating everything. Of course,
do you think Angular ever will be aware that we're doing micro frontends, or do you think it's always going to be something off to the side?
Hopefully, yeah. So I think Angular should not be aware because it would increase the complexity. But in my opinion, sooner or later, it would be nice that the Angular CLI is aware of it. And it would be nice if the most important things of this will be put into the Angular JSON.
Okay.
I mean, the Angular JSON is a tiny file. We can easily add some additional branches. No, perhaps.
You're like, there's some room to grow here. Let's use that file. I love it.
Yeah. But I would love it if this would be integrated into the Angular CLI. You know, the Angular team has a lot of things to do, so I don't think it will happen in short term, but I hope it will work in mid or in long term. And then I'm more than happy to throw my plugin here away and to leverage the default features of the CLI.
Okay.
It's a bit of this Batman situation. Perhaps you've seen Batman Begins, and Batman always said, well, I'm looking forward to the day where Gotham City doesn't need the Batman anymore. But until then, I will be the Batman.
That was beautiful.
Nice. So many good analogies. Right? I have a quick question about this. Is this something that could potentially go into the configuration in the Angular JSON and be handed to that custom builder? Like instead of having a separate file, we could actually just configure these things that it exposes in the shared, and then the custom builder just picks it up from there?
I think that's a nice idea. Yeah. So if we are tweaking this builder a bit more, currently it is just merging Webpack files. Yeah, then we could already do this by hand today.
And then we would ng add your extension, and it would add that builder. And then from there, all we need to do is go into our Angular JSON and do this configuration. And then maybe hopefully down the road, like you talked about, that then since we're doing it in Angular JSON, we're aligning ourselves ready for the CLI to just do it for us, right? Or something.
Oh, that's cool.
That's a nice idea. Yeah, that's a nice idea. So
Steven
let me
Fluent
put it
is
on
in
my
the
list.
chat. Steven Fluent's in the chat, and he said Manfred is the NG Batman.
And
Angie Batman, I like it. I like it. Well, I know Steven Fluing is a bit Marvel fan, so perhaps he's Iron Man and I am Batman, and sometime we will team up to make this world a better place. You know,
that is great. There's two different universes, but Module Federation brings both of you together into this. Wow.
Yeah, a crossover. Cool.
Sorry, I derailed a little bit. Okay. Let's go back.
I do have a quick question about the shared piece. You've talked about sharing, and actually we can see it here, the @Angular core, common, and router. Are we limited to sharing NPM modules? I'm wondering about the scenario if I say have a stateful user service, and I want to be able to share that across multiple applications so that the different applications could potentially be bringing in the same shared data.
Yeah, that's a good point. The thing is, Webpack is capable of this. Module Federation can do this. By default, we are pointing to NPM packages, but we can configure it to also respect, let's say, folders in your application or libraries that are part of our Monorepo. That's the short answer. And the long answer will come in some minutes, because it's funny, I have prepared a demonstration for this.
Okay.
Oh.
We'll debounce my question then.
Did you just say we'll debounce my question?
Did I bounce it or just no? I just delayed it a bit. Cool. Okay, so yeah, sharing stuff and roots here, and you see TypeScript. TypeScript is always the guy who is complaining, isn't he, or she, or it's he is saying that this file does not exist, and yeah, of course it does not exist because it is resolved at runtime. It's a virtual path, and that's why we need a DTS file. The name doesn't matter. Just call it DTS, and then you can say, hey, TypeScript, it's all good, man. This will work at runtime. So let's go with it.
Oh my
And then
God,
you'll see
amazing.
it is easy. Cool, so let's try it out. ng serve the shell and ng serve mfe1. Let's serve mfe1 first.
All right, while that's building, I do have to say that adding that DTS file is basically like giving TypeScript a Snickers bar. You get really cranky when you don't find this module, but here's a Snickers bar, feel better.
It's just another version of the any type.
I mean, you could also do it the Alyssa way and just be like, hush, hush.
Here you have really, I think one calls it han-egg issue, because you cannot really reference the other side, because if you referenced it, you would load it before. But I think when it just comes to a module, it's okay-ish, because our contract for the module is it provides some lazy child routes. If it came to a component, then perhaps it would be a good idea to share a common interface so that we know what we can expect from this component. So you're right. In this case, having a shared interface would be better than this implicit any. Okay, so everything is full here. Let's click here and whoa, it's loaded on demand. So let's have a look at the network tab. We are loading everything. I'm clicking here and it looks like lazy loading at first sight. But it's more than lazy loading. You see it here, localhost 3000, localhost 5000. It is just an URL where we grab this and load it. And also we only have 11.6 keys. This proves that Angular itself is shared, because otherwise it would be far bigger, wouldn't it? Okay, so one thing, there are two things left I really want to show you. The first thing is we want to get rid of static federation. We don't want to hard code this URL.
I'm so glad we're going to get to this part. I'm excited.
In our configuration. And the funny thing is, you just mentioned that Stephen Fluing is watching. When I showed this to Stephen Fluing about, I think, 1 month ago or 1.5 months ago, I told him, yeah, just copy paste this helper function and it will enable you to do dynamic federation. And when I said this, I realized, well, perhaps there is some room for improvement when it comes to developer experience. And so I just baked this helper function into this plugin. Everything we need to do here is to get rid of this section. I'm commanding it out. We need to switch over to our app.routes file. And then we switch out this dynamic import for this helper function. It's called load remote module. And you see it comes from this package from my plugin. And this basically takes 3 properties: the remote entry file, which is this here. It takes the remote name, which is mfe1, and it takes the exposed module. So basically, it takes everything we needed to define upfront before. This helper function is not doing a big magic. It has, I think, 30 lines of code. It is using what I'm calling the Webpack runtime API. When you compile an application with Webpack, you find some objects in your global namespace. And I think we all know what I mean when I'm saying global namespace. I'm referring to the window object. And you can use these low-level mechanisms to load something on demand. And this is just wrapping it nicely so that you don't need to work with these low-level objects. Yeah, and so, that's it.
Did you just add that load remote module to the build? When did you add that? You said you talked to him about a month ago. So did you just implement that?
Yeah. So sometimes I have my moments, and after this conversation, I found out, hey, there is room for improvement. So I implemented this.
Very cool.
Oh yeah, I need to project this ECMAScript module to the Angular module exported by it. Okay, so let's try it out. Yeah, I think it works. Ta-da, it works. One drawback here is that now also the metadata, the remote entry file, is lazy loaded. There is also a solution for this, and it comes with some issues if you load the metadata too late, because only now we would find out that this micro frontend uses Angular 11.1. But now it's too late. We have already loaded Angular 11.0.0. So it would be beneficial to load this remote entry point upfront. And also for this, there is a solution. So cut this out here. Let's go to the main file. And now you need to be very strong, because your main file does not look what it used to look before. This is also done by the schematic we've looked into before. It is just dynamically importing a Bootstrap file. This Bootstrap file has been generated by the plugin, and it is your former main TS. So why do we do this thing? At first sight, it doesn't make any sense, but at second sight, this is a pattern you find very often in module federation based applications. Could be a German composite term, a module federation based application. In German, this would be one word. And the thing is, this dynamic import is asynchronous. All the time, a dynamic import is asynchronous. And when we have something that's async at the beginning, Webpack module federation finds a time to squeeze itself into the bootstrapping process. It squeezes itself in here. And now here it is negotiating about versions. Let's use your version or let's use my version. You have Angular 11, you have Angular 11.1. So let's go with Angular 11.1. So, and here we can leverage another helper function, load remote entry, MFE1. And yeah, that's it. Now the metadata is loaded upfront, but only the metadata, the micro frontend is loaded just on demand. Here we have a promise chain. And then we do some error catching, and it would be also a good idea to catch an error here if there was one, because perhaps the micro frontend does not work, but in this case, we can at least bootstrap the shell and provide all the other micro frontends. Yeah, it is just a tiny implementation detail, but if you want to make full usage of this negotiation of versions, you should load your metadata upfront, only the metadata, not the rest. The rest can be loaded on demand, as you see here.
And then I'm assuming if you had multiple micro front ends with multiple of those remote entry, you'd have to import all of those, right? In that,
yeah,
multiple ones.
Yeah. So I've just discussed this today with a customer, and our idea was to bundle those remote entries on the server side so that we only need to request one file and it contains everything we need.
Nice.
Cool. And now let's come to the question of Broco. He asked, how can we share a library that is part of our monorepo? Basically, he asked, how can we share a service? And my answer would be put it into a library, because when it comes to the Angular CLI, the library is the unit of compilation. Technically, it just needed to be a separate file or a separate folder to make it work with module federation. But if we want to make it work together with the CLI, it would be nice to create an own library and share it, because, as mentioned, the library is the unit of compilation here. So for this, let's do ng generate library. Let's call it the message bus. And everything is generated. And now I'm doing what I'm call the NX monorepo style. I'm going to my ds-config, to the global one, and I'm adding a path mapping, not to the distribution folder, but to the source folder. This is the point within this demonstration where I'm always messing up, because, you know, I'm grabbing the wrong folder. So let me copy paste it. Message bus. Where is my entry point? Public API. Copy a relative path. And here we go. Okay, I'm on Windows. Yeah, that's it. So
Wait. It's based on wait, what? The Windows does the other, and I didn't even know. Wow. Thanks, Manfred.
yeah, I did a lot of .NET programming when I was younger in my youth. I was young and needed the money. No, I still love .NET, and yeah, that's why I'm still on Windows. And yeah, there are always those issues with forward slashes and backslashes. So yeah, this is my library, and in this case, as Brocco mentioned before, this is not an NPM package. This is just a folder somewhere in my Monorepo, and I have a beautiful name pointing to this folder. And by coincidence, this name looks like the name of an NPM package. Now, within this message bus, let me just implement some logic. So here, please don't judge me. I'm just introducing a public behavior subject. Normally, it would be more technical and would have more things. But here, I'm just going with a public behavior subject. I'm calling it events. New behavior subject, and this allows me to pass some messages around between the shell and the micro frontend and the next micro frontend. I'm also just going with string. Normally you would have a nice message interface with type and payload, something you might know from RxJS. But here, for the sake of simplicity, let's go with this. So let's grab the message bus. Let's go to our app.component of the shell. And in here, let's use the constructor. Let's inject the message bus. Here you see, it really looks like an NPM package. And here, let's say this.messagebus.event.next hello from the shell. And within my micro frontend, I'm doing the same. There I have a flight search component. So please ignore this constructor here. Let's just merge it with my constructor. And let's import it. Message bus, yeah, should be fine. And here, of course, I try to receive the messages. Subscribe, let's get the message, console, debug, message received in MFE1, and this is the message here. So the thing is, now we needed to provide some metadata of this folder for module federation. Module federation can do it if we look into this Webpack file here, and we could here provide an own object that is pointing to this folder, that is assigning our beautiful name to this folder. But the thing is, the Angular compiler is not aware of this. The Angular compiler will still use relative paths, and this breaks everything. And that's why, and this is the last feature of this library I want to showcase today, that's why I implemented this shared mappings class. This shared mappings class only gets the names of your shared libraries, and then it will generate the right metadata for Webpack module federation, and it will generate another Webpack plugin that tells the Angular compiler, hey, Angular compiler, don't use relative paths. Please use this beautiful path here so that module federation is aware that we are going to share something that already exists. So it's a bit complicated, but because we just need those 2 lines of code, and we should be fine. I would say let's try it out.
So
Mhm.
if we deployed our message bus to like NPM, so it was a public package at that point, would we not need the shared mappings and we would do it just like the shared like Angular core and stuff?
Totally. You only need
Gotcha.
this when you want to share something that's part of your monorepo.
Cool.
If you go npm, then just put your message bus into an npm package, and you should be fine.
Cool.
So let's cross fingers. F12. Let's click here. Let's click here. Shall we have a look to the console? What do you say?
Yes.
Let's try it out. Yeah, message received. Received. Okay. It's a typo micro frontend one in it. And yeah, I thought we should see something like hello from the shell. So let me just have a look what I screwed up here. It's called message bus. What is the library called? It's called also message bus. Oh yeah, of course, we need to do this in both Webpack configurations. It's as you said before, everyone needs to opt into this shell and the micro frontend one. So let me reload the micro frontend one. You know, the Webpack configuration is only respected when we load our application. And one more time, patience is a gift. So let's retry this. And hey, here it is. Hello from the shell. So we have a basic mechanism to communicate between our micro frontends. And if you ask me, message passing is a nice way to do this because it's quite unobtrusive, isn't it? I'm sending out a message and perhaps everyone is interested, perhaps no one is interested.
That's awesome. Very cool. And then of course that message bus, then we have the one instance that's essentially keeping state, right? And that state that's shared across all of our micro frontends that we're bringing in here. If they
yeah,
shared.
totally. That's why I'm using a behavior subject here. In real world, perhaps it might be a good idea to have some additional logic, because in real world, we need perhaps some mechanism that is filtering out some information of the messages and provide them all the time. Like, this is the current user. Micro frontend 2 came too late because it was lazy loaded, but here you have the current user. Here you have the current time frame we are talking about. Here you have the current customer we are talking about. Most of the time, there is a handful of context information you need to share.
It's very exciting. It's gets the mind just going and churning of oh man, can't wait to play with it. Can't wait to do more with it, you know? It's very killer.
So perhaps I can just show you 2 more slides. One thing is very important, namely the question, when can we have it? And as mentioned, Webpack 5 is final, but the CLI is only using an experimental Webpack 5 plugin. That means opt-in. That means you can start prototyping today. And in May, hopefully in May, when CLI 12 will ship with a fully flagged Webpack 5 integration, everything will work. And by the way, you know, I have this ebook and I have updated it. Meanwhile, I already have the 3rd edition. And this have been heavily updated for all the things we have discussed today and for further things. So if you're interested into this, perhaps you might check out this free ebook at AngularArchitects.io. And I think we are a bit out of time, but this is my blog, and here I have already uploaded the slides and the examples for everyone who wants to try this out.
Nice. I highly recommend that book. I picked that up a while ago. I haven't seen the latest version, but the version I have is great. And then all the content that Manfred puts out is amazing to help you understand these concepts and start thinking about the stuff on an architecture level. So we fully recommend hitting up that blog and consuming that content for sure.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you. That means you have looked at it. That was you.
I have.
Okay,
It's
cool.
yeah, it's great for sure.
Cool. Thank you.
Cool. All right. Yeah. So we're a little bit past time, but totally worth it because that content was great. Do we want to do any quick picks? Mike, do you have any pick that you want to share or anything? Or
I do not have any picks this week.
okay. I don't really either. Manfred, if you have anything anything else that you want to share in terms of something to pick or not?
Where perhaps a funny story. I don't know if it's that funny, but I'm a big Star Trek fan, and in Europe we've got Star Trek: The Lower Decks last week. I think it was already, you cannot say broadcasted, but it was already streamed in America several months before, and I was a bit skeptical, but I love it. It is Star Trek and it is funny. It is a cartoon, by the way. And the good thing is, if you don't have any expectations, you will always be happy. You will always have a positive result. So perhaps if you haven't seen it, look it up.
Nice. Yeah, that's one thing that's really, I find compelling, and a lot of people do, right, is taking these worlds, these IPs and these concepts, right, and then diving into like the side stories or other things that happen in that universe, in that world. And we see it with Star Wars, Star Trek, and the Marvel and things like that. So those are always really fun to kind of get life in that universe, but not from the main characters. Very cool.
Yeah, that's the idea. That's really funny.
Nice. Well, hey, Manfred, thanks a ton for coming on, sharing your time and sharing your knowledge. We always really, really appreciate it, and we always learn so much. So thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, I thank you for the invitation.
Anytime.
See you around.
All right. Have a good one, everyone. Take care. See ya.
Thank you.